He almost didn't go in. That was the thing that stayed with him afterward. How close he came to just signing the papers at the front desk and leaving. How close he came to never hearing any of it. Brendan Holloway had been in the Millfield Care Center parking lot for 11 minutes before he finally got out of the car. He knew the exact number because he'd been watching the clock on the dashboard the way he watched market numbers. Compulsively, reflexively, as if the digits themselves would tell him what to do. The building in front of him was clean and well-maintained, exactly the kind of place that cost what it cost and asked no apologies for it. He'd chosen it himself, or rather, had his assistant choose it. He hadn't asked many questions. Proximity to a good hospital, private room, good staff-to-patient ratio. That had seemed like enough. It wasn't enough. He knew that. In a way, he didn't let himself examine too closely. His father, Raymond Holloway, had been a resident of Millfield for 4 months. Brendan had visited twice. Both times brief, both times uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite name, and both times he'd left telling himself he'd come back sooner next time. He was 41 years old. He ran a logistics company with 11 offices across 6 states. He was good at decisions. He was good at motion, at momentum, at filling every available hour with something that needed doing. What he was not good at, had never been good at, was sitting in a room with his father and having nothing to protect himself with. No agenda, no deliverable, no clear purpose that justified the discomfort. He got out of the car. The woman at the front desk, young, tired-looking in the good-natured way of people who work genuinely hard, smiled at him and said his father was having a quiet afternoon. That was how they said it here, quiet afternoon. He had learned that this meant his father was awake, but not communicative. There were other kinds of afternoons. Brendan had not been present for most of them. He walked down the hall toward room 14. The corridor smelled faintly of lavender and floor wax. Someone had put a small watercolor painting near the nurse's station. A farmhouse, a dirt road, pale yellow sky. He didn't know why he noticed it. He noticed a lot of things he didn't usually notice when he came here. The ordinary world seemed to slow down in this building, and he resented that slowdown even as some stubborn part of him was grateful for it. He was 3 feet from the door to room 14 when he heard it. He stopped, walking. It was a voice, low, unhurried, a woman's voice, and it was singing, not performing, not filling silence for the sake of it, just singing, the way someone sings when they believe no one is listening. A folk song he half recognized, something with a river in it, something with the word home. The melody was simple. The voice was not remarkable in the way that remarkable voices get noticed and applauded. It was remarkable in a different way, in the way that a candle is remarkable in a dark room, not for how bright it burns, but for the fact that it burns at all. Brendan stood in the hallway and did not move. Through the half-open door he could see a slant of afternoon light across the floor. He could see his father's bed and the shape of his father in it, smaller than he remembered, always smaller than he remembered. And he could see the woman sitting in the chair beside the bed, leaning slightly forward, her hands folded in her lap, singing. His father's name was Raymond. Raymond Holloway had been a high school history teacher for 31 years. He had coached the junior varsity soccer team for 19 of those years. He had a laugh that came out of him like a door blowing open in wind, sudden and big and slightly startled sounding, as if the joy of it surprised him every time. He had lost his wife, Brendan's mother, to a stroke 8 years ago, and something in him had gone quiet after that. Not broken, exactly, just quieter. And then 2 years ago there had been the fall, and the diagnosis that followed the fall, and a series of smaller losses that accumulated the way small losses do. Each one manageable on its own, each one leaving something behind that didn't quite come back. He was 73 now. He weighed less than Brendan had ever seen him weigh. And he was lying in his bed in Millfield Care Center on a Wednesday afternoon with his eyes closed, while a woman Brendan had never seen before sat beside him and sang. And his father's hand, that large, familiar hand that had once lifted Brendan onto his shoulders at a 4th of July parade, that had graded 30 years' worth of history tests, that had held Brendan's mother's hand through her final weeks. That hand was resting loosely over the woman's folded ones. Not gripping, not clutching, just resting the way a hand rests when it trusts where it is. Brendan stood very still. He didn't know how long he stood there, long enough for the song to end and another to begin. Something slower this time, something that moved like water over stones. Long enough for him to become aware that his jaw was tight and his throat was doing something complicated. And he hadn't taken a full breath in he didn't know how many seconds. He stepped back from the doorway before she could see him. He stood with his back against the corridor wall and stared at the watercolor painting of the farmhouse and the dirt road, and he thought, with a clarity that felt almost violent, I don't know this woman. I don't know what she's doing in that room. I don't know how often she does this. And my father trusted her with his hand. He was back in his car 12 minutes later. He sat there for a while. Then he went back to the front desk. The aide's name was Cecily Marsh. 28 years old, the staff coordinator told him, when he asked with what he hoped sounded like casual administrative interest rather than whatever it actually was. She had been with Field for 2 years. She was one of their longer-tenured aides, which said something about the turnover rate in this industry, and something about Cecily Marsh in particular. She had been assigned to his father's wing for 6 weeks. She has a gift for the quieter patients, the coordinators said. Some of our residents respond better to different kinds of attention. Brendan thanked her and went home. He looked Cecily Marsh up that evening, and immediately felt like a fool for doing it, and kept going anyway. There wasn't much. LinkedIn with a modest profile, certified nursing assistant, 2 years of community college, currently studying for her LPN license on evenings and weekends. No social media presence to speak of. She'd done a brief stint at a pediatric care facility before Millfield. There was a small feature on the local community website about a volunteer program she'd helped run at a senior center the previous Christmas, where she'd organized a choir for residents who wanted to perform holiday songs. The photo showed a gymnasium with paper snowflakes hung from the rafters and 8 elderly residents seated in a row, and Cecily Marsh standing slightly to the side with a modest smile, as if she'd wandered into the frame by accident. He closed the laptop and told himself he was being bizarre. He went back the following Tuesday. He arrived at 2 in the afternoon, which he'd established from an offhand remark by the coordinator was when Cecily tended to check in on his father. He arrived early enough to be in the chair on the far side of the room. His father had been moved to a slightly larger room with a second chair when she knocked. "Mr. Holloway," she said from the doorway, addressing his father. She hadn't seen Brendan yet. "Mind if I come in?" His father turned his head. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the preparation for one, the architecture of one. "Cecily," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but it was there, it was present. And the sound of it hit Brendan somewhere behind the sternum, because Raymond Holloway had not said Brendan's name with that kind of ease in a long time, and he wasn't sure when that had stopped happening or whose fault it was. Then Cecily stepped into the room and saw Brendan in the chair, and she stopped. "Oh," she said. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had a visitor, Mr. Holloway. I can come back, that's my son," his father said. He looked at Brendan with something that wasn't quite pride but was adjacent to it. "Brendan, he's very busy." The way his father said it, not with bitterness exactly, just with an accuracy that carried the weight of a long time, made Brendan want to get up and leave, and also want to never leave again. "I know," Cecily said. She looked at Brendan. "He talks about you." Brendan didn't know what to do with that. He said, "Good things, I hope. Mostly baseball," she said. His father made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Brendan stayed for the whole visit. He watched Cecily check his father's comfort, adjust the blinds so the afternoon light didn't fall directly on the bed, bring him a cup of tea and set it at the right angle so Raymond could reach it without straining. These were small things. They were done with a quality of attention that Brendan associated with people who were genuinely present in what they were doing as opposed to moving through the motions of it. He'd built a career on being able to tell the difference. She didn't sing that day. He wondered afterward if it was because he was there. He wondered what it meant that he was slightly disappointed by this. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He didn't announce these visits in advance. He told himself this was about flexibility in his schedule, which was technically true, and also not the real reason. The real reason was harder to say plainly. He was trying to catch the version of his father that Cecily knew. The one who laughed about baseball. He kept arriving and finding parts of Raymond Holloway he'd forgotten were still there. On the 4th visit, Cecily arrived to find Brendan already in the middle of a conversation with his father about the 1986 World Series, a topic his father had apparently been holding opinions about for 40 years and remained prepared to defend with vigor. She stood in the doorway for a moment with her hand on the frame, and whatever expression crossed her face in that moment, she smoothed it away quickly. But he saw it. "Don't let me interrupt," she said. "Sit down," his father said. You can tell him he's wrong about Buckner." She sat. She sided, diplomatically, with neither of them. Later, when his father's eyes had grown heavy, and his breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of an afternoon nap, she and Brendan sat on opposite sides of the bed in the particular quiet that sleeping people create around themselves. "Does he talk about my mother?" Brendan asked in a low voice. Cecily was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "he tells me about the first time he saw her. At a bus stop in November, she was wearing a red coat." She paused. "He says that's how he knew. The red coat in November." Brendan looked at his sleeping father, the large hand loose on the blanket, the face that in sleep lost some of the work of being awake. "I didn't know that story," he said. "He tells it like it just happened," she said. Not unkindly. He didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say to that. But he thought about it for a long time afterward. He was back the following week when he heard her sing again. He'd arrived early and was sitting in the hallway outside his father's room. The door was barely ajar, catching up on emails on his phone when he heard it start. Low and soft, just as before. A different song this time, something he didn't recognize. Slower, with a minor key running through the middle of it like a thread. He set his phone face down on his knee. Through the gap in the door he could see his father's face. Raymond's eyes were closed, but there was a quality to the stillness of his face that was different from sleep. It was the stillness of someone listening, deeply and completely, the way Brendan sometimes stood at the back of a concert hall, when no one knew he was there, receiving something, being inside something. The song curved upward at the end, and then resolved, and then ended. After a moment his father said, in a voice that barely carried, "That's the one she used to hum. On Sunday mornings, in the kitchen." Brendan understood without needing to be told that she was his mother. He hadn't heard his father say anything about his mother in almost 2 years. "He taught me that one," Cecily said quietly. She meant Raymond. "He hummed it for me a few weeks ago, just a few bars. I looked up the rest." There was a long silence. Then his father said, very quietly, "She would have liked you." Brendan stayed in the hallway for a while longer. He wasn't sure he could have explained, in the language he usually used to explain things, the language of outcomes and decisions, and practical considerations, what was happening to him in that corridor. Something was coming loose in him. Something he had held tightly for a long time, without quite knowing how tightly he'd been holding it. He had taken the shorthand of himself for granted. Busy, practical, good at the things that matter. He had told himself the things that mattered were obvious, and that he knew what they were, and that he was attending to them. He was no longer entirely sure that was true. He asked her about it 2 days later, in the parking lot. He had been heading in as she was heading out. End of her shift, he gathered, and he fell into step beside her without quite planning to. "The song," he said. "How did you know?" She looked sideways at him. "Know what?" That he needed that, the music. That it would. He stopped. He wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. That it would bring him back. That it would make a window where there had been a wall. Cecily was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet he got the sense that she was choosing her words carefully, not to protect herself, but to be accurate. "I didn't know," she said. "Some people respond to it, some people don't. Your father, the first time I tried it, he was having a very hard day. Not communicative at all. I just started humming because I do that when I'm nervous, honestly. And he just..." She paused. He turned his head, like something in him recognized it, even when the rest of him was somewhere far away. "But you kept doing it," Brendan said. "Of course." She said it the way you say "of course" when the answer is so obvious that the question barely makes sense. He had spent 20 years in rooms with people who did things because they were strategic, because they were advantageous, because they served a purpose that could be identified and articulated. He could not remember the last time someone had said "of course" to him with that kind of simplicity. "Was I singing too loud?" she asked, a slight smile at the corner of her mouth. It caught him off guard, and he laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes out before you decide to allow it. "I've been standing in the hallway," he said, "multiple times, so probably." "I noticed," she said. He stopped walking. "And you didn't say anything?" "He was happy when you were there," she said. That seemed more important than the logistics. He looked at her. She was not looking at him with any particular calculation. She was just standing there in the parking lot in her scrubs with her bag over one shoulder, stating a fact. "He talks about you a lot," she said again. "I mean it. Not just the baseball. He talks about the way you used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while he graded papers. He says the house felt full when you were in it." She tilted her head slightly. I don't think he knows how to tell you that himself." Brendan didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the building behind her. The clean beige facade, the parking lot lights just beginning to think about coming on in the late afternoon. He thought about his father at the kitchen table with a red pen, working through a stack of essays, the quiet, companionable rhythm of two people inhabiting the same space without demanding anything of each other. He used to sing too, Brendan said. In the car, always off-key. He'd pretend he wasn't doing it when he realized I'd noticed. He paused. "I hadn't thought about that in a long time." "Tell him that," Cecily said. "Next time you're with him, tell him you remembered." He did. He didn't plan a speech. He didn't rehearse it or strategize it, or think about how to frame it for the best result. He just sat beside his father the following Saturday, a morning visit this time, light coming gray and soft through the window, and after a while he said, "Do you remember singing in the car? You always did it like you hoped I wouldn't notice." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. Then something in the old face shifted, and the laugh came. Sudden and big and slightly startled sounding, just the way it always had. "I have a fine voice," his father said with complete dignity. "You really don't," Brendan said. His father laughed again, longer this time, and then they sat together in the gray morning light and talked. Not about anything consequential, not about logistics or planning, or the things Brendan usually found himself managing when he was in this room. Just talked, the way you talk when you've stopped protecting yourself from talking. His father told him about the red coat at the bus stop in November. Brendan listened to the whole story, all the way through, without checking his phone once. He called Cecily a week later. He'd gotten her number from the staff coordinator, with the awkward explanation that he had some questions about his father's care plan, which was true in the technical sense and not particularly honest in the larger one. She answered on the third ring, slightly breathless, and said she was studying. He apologized for interrupting and almost hung up. "What did you need?" she said. "I wanted to," he stopped, started again. "I wanted to say thank you for what you did for him, for what you've done for us, I suppose. I'm not sure if I have the right language for it." There was a brief silence. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "It's my job. It isn't your job to learn a song because an old man hummed 3 bars of it." Another silence, longer. "No," she said quietly. That part was just because he missed her. He sat in his home office, good furniture, clean lines, the kind of room designed to communicate that serious work happened here, and stared at the middle distance. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. If that's something you'd be open to. Not as a thank you, or not only as a thank you." He stopped. "I'm doing this badly." "You're doing okay," she said. There was warmth in her voice that she wasn't working at. "Yes, I'd like that," he told his father the following week. Raymond was having a good day, clearer than usual, present in a way that came and went and couldn't be counted on but was luminous when it arrived. He listened to Brendan's news with his head tilted slightly, the way he used to listen to a student who was working through an answer that wasn't quite right yet but was getting warmer. "About time," Raymond said. "Dad, she told me you'd been standing in the hallway like a lost dog for 3 weeks. Brendan sat back. "She told you that?" "We talk," his father said, with the serenity of someone who has earned the right to be amused at his son. The afternoon light came through the window and lay in a long flat angle across the floor. His father's hand rested on the blanket. Outside somewhere a cart was moving down a hallway with a sound of soft wheels, and farther away someone was laughing. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that carries. "She said something to me once," his father said after a while. "Early on, I was having a bad stretch. I don't know if you knew, maybe you didn't. She sat with me and she said, 'You're not alone in this room, Mr. Holloway. I promise.'" He was quiet for a moment. "I hadn't had anyone say that to me in a while." Brendan looked at his father. "I should have said it," he said. "You're saying things now," Raymond said simply. That was all. No recrimination, no wound dressed up as wisdom. Just the plain fact of it. You're saying things now. Offered without conditions, the way his father had always offered the things that mattered. Brendan stayed until dinner. He sat in the chair beside the bed while his father dozed in and out of an afternoon nap. And he did not check his phone. And he did not think about the office. And he listened to his father's quiet breathing and thought about red coats and bus stops in November and the songs people carry for each other across all the years that separate them. When his father woke briefly near the end of the afternoon, he looked at Brendan in the chair with an expression that didn't need a name. "Come back Tuesday," he said. "I'll be here." Brendan said, and this time when he said it, it wasn't a plan. It was just a fact, simple and certain and already true, the way the best things are, before you even have to decide them.